hello fellow historian, and welcome to my lab. Now that my new arc reactor is online, Jarvis, what are we designing next? Huh. Okay. Let's take a look.
The third part of a short answer question will always deal with historical thinking skills, like comparison, causation, and continuity and change over time, just like an LEQ. So one way to think of this kind of quiz is that you're writing 3 body paragraphs for a long essay question. In this particular prompt, we're comparing the similarities and differences between the New England and Southern colonies. So question A deals with the biggest similarity between the two regions. The thesis I'm going to design is the fact that both regions were tied to mercantilism, because all of the colonies were tied to mercantilism in this time in history. In a comparison SAQ, it's really important that you pick and explain at least one piece of evidence per concept that appears in the prompt. So we need a piece of evidence from both the New England region and a piece of evidence from the Southern region. I'm going to say the New England region had to sell goods like sailing ships and textiles only to England, just like the Southern colonies could only send their cash crops like sugar and tobacco only to British ports. Then you finish up your first answer with an analysis sentence in which you spell out the historical thinking skill in the prompt, in this case, similarity. So I'm going to say, even though these economic goods are different from each region, both regions could only sell their goods to Britain, meaning they were both bound to the same economic structure.
The first prompt of this SAQ is online. Let's take a look at the next one.
In these kinds of historical thinking skill SAQs, the second prompt will always be the other component of the historical thinking skill in the question. So since this comparison SAQ started with similarity, the second prompt deals with differences. So my thesis is going to be that the biggest difference between the New England and Southern colonies was their economies. Now, since I brought up early industry in New England and cash crops in the South, it's important to build off that evidence with new evidence you already know. You might remember that I used 2 pieces of evidence in my previous answer. I could have only used 1 piece of evidence per region for that answer and used the other pieces to answer the second prompt. That is a sound strategy on test day if you want to do that. However, I'm going to use a slightly different approach and argue that the economies are different. The New England colonies had an early industrial approach as they were engaged in timber harvesting and ironworks to build their ships, while the Southern colonies had a slave-based economy with indentured servants and later imported African slave labor used primarily to grow their cash crops like sugar and tobacco. Then we wrap up with our analysis. This economic difference is important because both regions had different ways of making money, and this difference will cause even bigger social and political differences, which will lead up to the American Civil War.
Your design is almost fully operational. Let's take a look at the final piece before we paint it hot rod red, or whatever color you want.
The third prompt in a historical thinking SAQ will always borrow from half of another historical thinking skill. It is always a good idea to plan on causation being the third prompt because College Board loves causation. This prompt is designed with that purpose in mind. This prompt is asking us for some sort of factor which caused the differences between the New England and Southern colonies. Since I argued that the economies were the most different, I'm going to argue that the climate played the biggest role in splitting those two regions. I'm going to argue that the climate in the New England region was far too cold to grow cash crops like tobacco, clearly. Finally, we're going to wrap up our answer with analysis, saying this environmental evidence is important because it split the economies of both regions, which directly shaped certain social factors pertaining to the kinds of people who worked in each region, resulting in political systems to make those structures of work more permanent.
And now it's time for the moment of truth, fellow historians. Our thesis is well crafted, our evidence is accurate, and our analysis is logical, and it works. Just like your SAQ. Congratulations. Now, even though you are only doing 3 SAQs on the national test in May, there are 6 possible variations of those 3 questions. So let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see strategies for all 6. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've been asked by a crazy scientist to invent something called a flux capacitor. I'll let you know how it goes. See you next time. Hello again. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you are a teacher, resources for this topic and so many others can be available on my Teachers Pay Teacher store, Sci-Fi High School. And if you like this video, take a look at the channel. In addition to APUSH history stuff, we got stuff on psychology, creative writing, Hawaiian history, and a lot more in the future. So with that said, live long and prosper, e malama pono, and see you next time.